Hello and welcome to our Focus Forum. We're letting people drift in here while we get ready to start. We'll be starting in just a moment. We have quite a few people who've registered for today's session. We're very excited about this. I think you're really going to appreciate and the experts and the information that we're going to be sharing today. So we're anxious to get started, and it'll be just a few minutes. We've got over 30 people right now coming in, and looks like it's starting to slow down a bit, but we'll give it just another minute, another few seconds, and then we'll get started. All right. Great. So welcome everybody to today's Focus Forum. I'm Rita Riker, President of the Board of Focus Greater Syracuse, and happy to see so many with us today. Today we're going to hear about housing rights and protections. We have several experts with us today who will share their knowledge and experiences. As usual, we're scheduled for 1 hour and we're recording this session. We have received several questions from all of you, which we have shared with our panelists. You can also add questions in the chat as you think of them. Focus Board member Brian Hope will manage the Q&A, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible after the individual presentations. Now I'm very pleased to turn this over to our moderator, Bishop Bernard Alex. Bernard is the lead servant of the Victory Temple Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church and is committed to removing barriers of social and individual inequity. He is president of the Syracuse chapter of the National Action Network. He attended Tuskegee Institute and pursued post-baccalaureate curriculum development and program design at Syracuse University with an emphasis in urban educational barriers. He is one of SUNY Upstate Medical University's longest serving on-call clergy and is trained in the end-of-life care competency systems with a focus in providing support in the African-American faith tradition. A Syracuse native, Bishop Alex is dedicated to serving as a social transformer, affirming we are better together. Bernard, take it away.
Well, thank you, Rita, and good morning, everyone. And let's get started. Our first presenter today is Caroline Downey. She is an experienced attorney and employee of the New York State Division of Human Rights. In January of 2007, she became the general counsel for the Division of Human Rights. As general counsel, she advises the commissioner on all legal matters affecting the division, supervising the legal bureau, including the legislation and legal opinions unit, litigation and appeals unit, and legal records management. In '92, she was promoted to the position of Director of Legislation and Legal Opinions for the division, where her responsibilities included overseeing the division's legislative and regulatory programs. Ms. Downey was supervising attorney for the division in June of 2005, the position to general counsel. With that, we are going to gain great information from Caroline. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Bernard. And I really appreciate being here this morning. And I'm always delighted, as Bernard has indicated, I've been at the Division of Human Rights enforcing the great human rights law of the state of New York for a long time, but I'm still very excited about it. And the housing, it's the oldest human rights law in the country, the oldest enforcement civil rights law in the country, and housing provision, and it started in 1945, housing provisions started to be added during the 50s. So it has some time, even on the Federal Fair Housing Act, preceded it by over 10 years. And the areas that we cover in housing are all our 15 areas of coverage plus a few. So we cover a race, a sex, a national origin, creed, disability. In the areas of reasonable accommodation, we see a lot of litigation, and reasonable accommodation, accessibility for housing is a very important aspect of what we do. We cover all other areas under the human rights law that you might imagine, sexual orientation, gender identity. We have some new areas that I want to cover in a few minutes, and I'm only taking a few minutes, and so I'm really compressing this morning. But what I really want to start with telling you about is how accessible we are and how, although we have over 7,000 complaints filed with us in the last fiscal year, about 10% of which are housing, we still want more. And we want you in the communities to be aware of what we can offer as an agency. So first of all, as I said, probably, in the area of 700 housing discrimination complaints a year, what happens to a complaint? How can they be filed? This is information that's all on our website, so you don't have to write it all down. But just the short version is anybody can file a complaint with the Division of Human Rights. It's gotten very easy to do so. The pandemic had a few good outcomes, and one of them was moving along our process so that it can all be done. It can be done really right from your phone or from a computer, and you can file a digital complaint with us. We used to have a notarized signature. We don't need that anymore. Again, thank you, pandemic. We had to move in that direction, and it really made sense. We needed a legislative change for that, but we got that. So you can file a complaint online or go to any one of our regional offices. And we do have a regional offices in Syracuse. It's part of the Rochester, Syracuse area. Julia Day is the regional director of that area. And you can file directly at the office if you prefer. You can also get all kinds of information about how you file or help with filing. But the system that we have with filing is really quite user-friendly. And so you're asked a questionnaire, and based on that questionnaire, a complaint form is generated from that information. So when it comes to us, we do have a specialized housing unit, which is in the Bronx, which is where our offices are. Our main offices are in the Bronx. That's where I work. So we do try to make our housing unit quite cohesive, so that we can address housing most broadly. And these are experts in housing discrimination. So the complaint will be investigated there. And you will be contacted by an investigator. The respondent will have to put in a response. We take all the information that we need. We'll talk to you again. Sometimes we have a two-party conference. We may have a site visit, and we will reach a determination as to whether there's probable cause to send the case to a public hearing. If there's not, it's dismissed for no probable cause, or if we don't have jurisdiction, it's dismissed, and that order itself is appealable in court by the complainant. If there's probable cause, it goes on to a hearing before an administrative law judge at the division, or there's an option to proceed in court at that point as well in a housing case. If the case proceeds at the division, there'll be a public hearing, and it is quite like a trial. It's usually a couple of days at least. Evidence is presented. It is not like court evidence. Hearsay is permitted. It is more relaxed. An administrative proceeding is more relaxed than a court proceeding as a general rule. And we will ultimately reach a determination in that is decided by the Commissioner of Human Rights. The case is then appealable to court by either side. So if we find discrimination, what are the kinds of things that we can offer as remedies right here at the division? And they're really anything that you could get in court. So making the housing available where it wasn't before, making the reasonable accommodations that I mentioned, compensation for mental anguish, compensation for any out-of-pocket expenses. And by the way, the mental anguish compensation does not have a cap on it. It depends on the circumstances. It's unlimited. There are punitive damages that can be awarded, civil fines up to $100,000, certainly requirements, and we have these even if a case is settled, that the housing provider engage in training of its staff so that these things don't continue to happen. We have provisions for attorney's fees and expert witness fees and other related and reasonable relief. So you can see we're a full service organization. When you come to us, we will take the case from beginning to wherever its end may be. So that's the little brief version. I just wanted to cover in a couple of minutes at some new areas of the law that are so important, because the law has changed a lot in the last few years. It's always been a vibrant law, but it's gotten even more so. And one of the areas that we started covering in 2019 was source of income discrimination. There's a lot of information about this on our website. It's such an important part of our jurisdiction. We're getting a lot of these kinds of cases. It used to be that a landlord could just say no Section 8. Well, can't do that anymore, much to some landlords' surprise and annoyance. So it has been covered in other parts of the state, some cities and counties, but now it's covered statewide. And this gives all kinds of protection. It's really a very broad definition of what source of income is, but we're seeing mostly cases with some kind of subsidy or voucher or other kind of public assistance. And those cases, those vouchers have to be accepted by landlords, even with whatever attendant inspections may be required. Those have to be accepted as well. So we've had a lot of cases in that area. Another area I wanted to mention was relatively new changes to the law with respect to an arrest history. So the provisions of the law were amended so that if an arrest has been resolved in your favor, has resulted in a sealed conviction, has resulted in a youthful offender kind of adjudication, or an administrative a dismissal in a contemplation of an adjournment and contemplation of dismissal, or as I said, sealed records, which is a very broad and potentially broadening area. Those cannot be asked about by a landlord or a realtor or anyone else who comes under our housing provisions. Can't be asked about, and if they are asked about, the law specifically provides that they may be answered in the negative, even if it were so. So that if there was an unlawful question, you don't have to give the actual answer because it was an unlawful question. So a great deal of important coverage. And this applies, of course, to landlords and all kind of real estate professionals. I mean, just to back up 2 seconds, we cover all kinds of housing providers except for 2-family owner occupied. That's our one real exception. And all kinds of realtors and real estate professionals, very, very broad. The law is interpreted broadly, and we intend to do it that way. The 2 other quick areas I wanted to mention that are new to the law are citizenship and immigration status, which was added the end of 22 last year. And again, this gives a fair amount of coverage. We had covered this similarly because very often that dovetails with national origin discrimination as well. But now it's specifically in the law with respect to citizen and immigration status, unless there is some law that requires that kind of information, then that can't be a basis for discrimination. And the other important area that was added, and we'd had it in employment for quite a while, but the status as a victim of domestic violence has been added to housing as well and other areas of the law. So landlords or housing providers in general can't take discriminatory action because of someone's status. And I'm probably as a victim of domestic violence, and I'm afraid I've gone over my time, but there's a lot to this law, and we urge you to come and file with us if you have issues or discuss it with us as well.
Thank you so much for that wealth of information, and I'm sure that there will be some questions that will give further insight. And next, we're going to hear from Sally Santangelo. She is the executive director of, CNY Fair Housing, which is a nonprofit fair housing organization based in Syracuse that serves 17 counties of central and northern New York. Sally started with the organization as a fair housing investigator and later became the director of enforcement. She also serves as the chair of the policy committee for the Housing and Homeless Coalition of Central New York and is on the board of directors of the National Fair Housing Alliance and Home Headquarters. Let's hear from Sally.
Thank you so much. Every time I hear Caroline talk, I have to write notes about the things I need to update in my slides and presentations because New York State does have a very vibrant human rights law, which we appreciate that we are in a state that is continuing to expand protections for people and open up housing opportunity for people in different ways, even if that means I have to continually update all of my presentations and outreach materials. But just a little bit about us, CNY Fair Housing. We, as Bernard said, we serve 17 counties of central and upstate New York, though we are based in Syracuse. And we receive funding from federal, state, and local governments, but we are an independent private nonprofit. We're one of 6 private fair housing organizations in the state, the others being in Buffalo, Rochester, and then 3 downstate in Westchester, New York City, and Long Island. And we work to eliminate housing discrimination in a variety of ways. And first, we investigate complaints of discrimination. So individuals can contact us by phone or email or make an appointment to come in. And we will look to identify if the treatment that they're experiencing in their housing is because of discriminatory reasons, is because of their protected characteristics under federal or state law, or even sometimes local law. We kind of then work to identify and filter those cases. A lot of the complaints we receive are actually not fair housing related, but are about other housing issues. And then we provide referrals to community partners, such as legal services and all of the other great groups in the area that work to help advance housing rights in different ways. One of the things that is a little bit unique about our work is that as part of our investigations, we do conduct undercover testing. So we send individuals out as almost like secret shoppers to provide third-party evidence for complaints of discrimination to help identify if a landlord's policies or practices are discriminatory, or in the real estate. We also test in the real estate industry, lending, insurance, appraisals, all areas of the housing market. And we test not just based on those complaints that we receive, but we also do audit-based testing or systemic testing to try to find hidden forms of discrimination where people may not always file a complaint, or maybe don't recognize sometimes that they're being discriminated against, but we know discriminatory practices are occurring, sometimes based on demographic characteristics or other issues of the area. And as part of, with those audits, we can take legal action as an organization. So we have legal standing as a fair housing organization to file complaints. Even if an individual cannot bring the complaint, a lot of times people are they're facing housing crisis. They may not feel that they have the time to pursue a civil case or a fair housing case. So we are able to pursue cases as a fair housing organization, have legal standing to do so. And I'll give some examples in a moment of some of those cases. We also do a lot of counseling and advocacy, particularly around the areas of reasonable accommodations and modifications. And we work to try to resolve a lot of cases through advocacy before having to take legal action. And we successfully resolve a lot of cases just by, sometimes writing a letter to a landlord on behalf of a tenant. Sometimes we have to go, may have a cease and desist or something a little more formal, but often we can just explain what the law says and hope to resolve those issues. We have attorneys on staff as well who do file complaints when we need to. And we file complaints in federal court, state court, with HUD or with the State Division of Human Rights, depending on the type of case. And our attorneys provide representation to individuals throughout the process as well, depending on, in each of those venues. Lately, we've had a number of different cases, kind of interesting cases. We've successfully settled several source of income cases the last 3 years. And particularly, we've been seeing a lot of source of income cases related to income requirements, where housing providers maybe will say that they accept vouchers, but then they have policies that keep voucher holders and people with other types of housing assistance from actually being able to rent the property by saying, for example, having an income requirement that effectively keeps those households from being able to rent. So We've had a number of those source of income cases. We recently settled a language access case that was households. We had allegations that a family had been told that they couldn't rent an apartment because they didn't have an English-speaking person in the household. And so we conducted testing and were able to verify those allegations. And then we filed a case in federal court. We had a favorable decision that supporting our case, and also the Department of Justice filed a statement of interest in support of that case. And we settled that earlier this year. But the court decision basically said that we had a viable claim, stating that a refusal to rent to households that didn't have English-speaking members was national origin discrimination. We have a couple of disability-related cases also. We do about half of our cases are disability-related. And as Caroline mentioned, some of those are related to reasonable accommodations and modifications. We also just settled this past year a large design and construction case related to accessibility. And the settlement was actually covered 50 properties in 6 states. And we resulted in $7 million in accessibility improvements at those 50 properties as a senior housing provider who was alleged to have not built their property to accessible standards. So a couple of the kind of bigger cases we've had, a lot of what we do are, helping write a letter to keep somebody in their home, making sure somebody has the emotional support animal they need to successfully manage their disability. A lot of, individual needs. Lastly, we do a lot of education and outreach. And then finally, we do research and policy advocacy to work to proactively increase housing opportunity and to advance housing equity. We conduct fair housing assessments and provide technical assistance for local municipalities. So we conduct every 5 years a fair housing assessment for Syracuse and Onondaga County, as well as some other municipalities. And most recently, we conducted a study on exclusionary zoning that looked to measure the extent to which land use policies in Onondaga County towns and villages and the city of Syracuse limited the ability to build affordable housing and other more affordable housing types. So that study came out in February. It's on our website, right on the front page of our website, if you want to take a look at CNYFairHousing.org. And we're excited. We're going to be doing some more work to do more outreach around zoning, which has been a really hot topic lately. But we have to, in addition to being responsive about the limits that people face in their housing, we try to work to, improve and create policies that improve housing opportunity for everyone, and particularly for those who are protected under our fair housing laws. So with that, I will stop my remarks and I look forward to the questions.
And thank you, Sally. And next, Ms. Susan Griffith. She works as a managing attorney for legal services for Central New York. Legal Services of Central New York, LSCNY, helps people and communities in Central New York change law, policy, and systems to promote equity and create pathways out of poverty. She received her Juris Doctorate from Southern Methodist University, SMU, in 1983 and received her bar admission in the city of New York. She has been honored with numerous awards, such as the Pro Bono Service Award for Onondaga County and the Sister Mary Vera Award. She is currently a member of the Onondaga County Bar Association. And let's hear from Susan. Thank you.
Well, hello all. It's very nice to be here. And this is just it's a huge topic and it's a really important topic. I'm going to try to keep my remarks short because I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and I think it would be very helpful for us to be able to address specifics for you folks. But let me just tell you first, Legal Services of Central New York covers 13 counties in Central New York. We have a very active landlord-tenant program that handles cases throughout those counties. And as you might guess, at this point, a lot of that work involves evictions. We're coming out of a period where the pandemic protections for tenants, which were quite good for New York and other states as well, but was able to keep people in their homes for a lot of people, and was very important. Those protections have gradually fallen off, and there's very little left in the protection for tenants coming out of the pandemic restrictions. We see a number of the problems that both Sally and Caroline have discussed, and we will deal with those as those come in. But I thought maybe it might be helpful to talk about some of the common issues that we have as far as evictions go. And an issue that hasn't been discussed much, and probably isn't discussed that much in terms of fair housing, but the problems of conditions of housing in this area. And honestly, at this point, it's a nationwide crisis. So let me just talk a little bit about the habitability issues first of all. New York and many other states have state laws that require any residential property be suitable for living. It be safe and habitable for all concerns. So this is a fundamental issue in all housing cases, and it comes up very, very frequently. So there's a little bit of subjectivity involved in determining what's a breach of the warranty of habitability. Things like the carpet when you move in may not be very clean, is probably not going to raise a level of concern to many authorities. However, if you have sewage in your basement, or your heating is not working, or you have no hot water, those things are very fundamental. And unfortunately, we see a whole bunch of condition problems. The housing stock in this area and in many areas is old. It is deteriorating. It can be very costly to fix, it is something that needs to be looked into. When people have complaints like this, we virtually always will send people to code enforcement. Each municipality or town or village out there has their own code enforcement officer. And they will come out and look at the property, may be able to cite the landlord, may end up with fines, or perhaps end up in a different type of housing court where the landlord can be punished in some way. However, we do hear on a very regular basis, because as you can tell, there's many, many jurisdictions out in our area. And each one has its own code officer, code enforcement division. And we often hear complaints that the code enforcement officer is in cahoots with the landlord, or the landlord will kind of schmooze them through the inspection. We always have to take that with a grain of salt, but I will tell you that is not an unusual situation, especially in some of our smaller communities where all the town or village officials know one another and are very involved with one another. It can make it very difficult. So, and I do want to touch on one other breach of warranty of habitability issue that is very important, and that is the issue of lead. Our housing stock in Syracuse, and practically anywhere at this point, anything that has any older paint in it at all, lead was an ingredient in every paint, pretty much every paint, up till 1971. And even if you cover it up with regular paint, that lead will leach out, and it has a devastating effect on children. Devastating. We are you know, in some ways we're raising a generation of children who are poisoned, and those have long-term incurable neurological effects on children. So you know, I will always caution people when they're doing in this situation, if you have flaking paint, if you have a suspicion about it, you can call the health department, and the health department will come out and do an inspection if you have children in the home and you have suspicions of lead in the household. But those issues come up very regularly. The community response to it is very well-meaning, but unfortunately it's not really all that well put together at this point. So the remedies to the lead problem in Syracuse is very slow moving and often has to happen on a case-by-case basis. So I'll talk a little bit about eviction. In every eviction court, evictions are brought in the locality where they are. So it could be, if you're located in the city limits, it goes to the Syracuse City Court. If you're located in the town of DeWitt, it goes to the town of DeWitt Court. All the way out to the smallest court in the smallest locality in the state. And those are often, the judges are often in those circumstances not lawyers. They are, this may be a very difficult area of them to practice, and they may not be all that well versed in the technicalities of landlord-tenant law. Evictions in New York State are summary proceedings, which means they are intended to go much faster than your regular lawsuit. Although there have been some protections that were added to New York State law in 2019, the ability to remove someone from their home is still very short. And so when we're dealing with an eviction, we're dealing with a high crisis situation for everyone involved. We do see a number of fair housing issues as we go through things though. But let me just talk first about the two basic kinds of of evictions. One is a non-payment eviction. These are the ones we see that are probably most common. At this point, someone falls behind on their rent. There's really not much of a grace period in New York State law. And so they are facing eviction. You're only given between 10 and 17 days of your court date. And then you have to show up and defend yourself. And I will tell you without question that most judges in this state expect to deal with that case in the first appearance. And it depends upon the court, but they actually don't expect to spend more than 5 minutes on a case. So you can see that it's really, really difficult to get these issues raised. And we see ourselves as a very important part of this process because we can slow it down. And we do slow it down in a number of cases, in many cases. There are rights of tenants. There are defenses to these provisions. This is one issue. The non-payment may be a situation where the breach of warranty of habitability comes up because the place may not be worth the rent that you're paying. And in my view, if a place is deemed unfit by code enforcement, or you feel yourself it is unfit for human habitation, my view is that they should get no rent, because you can't rent a place that's not safe for human habitation. And if it's not safe for human habitation, you get zero rent. I will tell you that that is not a universally accepted provision by courts. And those are hard-fought issues, but we consistently raise them, and I think it's really important that we keep raising them. And those can include the things that we talked about before, including lead. The next type of tenancy, the next type of eviction that we normally see is called a holdover. And that means usually at the end of a rental period, the landlord gives notice that we're terminating the tenancy. Many of you know that if you have a written lease, you have some good protections that will take you through the end of the lease term. A lot of tenancies out there, though, are month-to-month tenancy. They start out that way, which means the period that they have to get out, it can happen in pretty short order. And we want to be able to protect under those circumstances. I know there have been some questions about the taking people to court when there's housing, when there are habitability issues. And there is a New York state law that protects tenants from facing a retaliatory eviction. That is, you complain about it to your landlord, you complain about conditions to code enforcement, you complain to your social worker who lets the landlord know that there are problems with the apartment. That cannot result in the landlord deciding to terminate the tenancy and try to evict you. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, and I will tell you that it is a difficult one to enforce because there's a presumption, if those complaints were made, that it's retaliatory and there should not be an eviction. But the burden then shifts to the landlord to say, we have a good faith reason for evicting them that doesn't have anything to do with that. And the judges, unfortunately, are pretty receptive to those things, like, oh, I guess I need to do some remodeling, so we need to do that, so we have to have it vacant. Or, sometimes they pay their rent late. We're really problem for us, so we'll do it. It's a difficult case to make, but they are very important cases to make, and we continue to do that. Everyone should know that there are two basic kinds of housing that we deal with. That is private housing and federally subsidized housing in some ways. There are more protections generally in subsidized housing than there are in private housing cases. And somewhere in the middle are the voucher cases, the housing choice vouchers from Section 8, where there are some more protections, but not a lot. Everybody seems to, in the law, think that the landlords need more protecting than anyone else, and it's unfortunate, but again, it is something that we face. So just one more thing I would like to mention, in the eviction cases, which is what we most commonly see, it is a very difficult way of addressing fair housing issues while we raise them, and they can provide defenses. It is very, very difficult to get a reasonable hearing on that. As I mentioned before, when on an average, a court thinks that they should be able to deal with an eviction case in 5 to 10 minutes, then it is very difficult to get a real hearing on these issues. Tenants are in a very difficult negotiating position. They are fearing losing their housing in very short order. The cases often get negotiated just so that the client can stay or can be comfortable. And that is a very unfortunate way to have to be able to deal with evictions. But we do our best. We will fight the good fight, and we will continue to do that. So, but I also do want to mention one more thing, sorry. We do handle some other issues. Many of you may have heard about the Skyline litigation. We are heading that litigation. And, that case is, dragging along, but it's moving forward. We are able, from our eviction defense work, to identify other problems. For example, we have a housing complex that in the last week has served holdover notices saying that tenants are objectionable. And they all happen to be, there are 20 Black men. So you can see that there are many issues out there, and we will be working to address those issues as we move forward. So thanks. I guess I didn't leave that as much time for questions as I hoped.
I'm Brian Hoke. I will pose some questions to our panelists. Thanks so much, everybody, for your comments. We had a few questions submitted in advance related to getting the word out. I don't know for a fact, but I'm willing to bet that there are perhaps more people who could avail themselves of your services than make use of them. You all spoke a little bit about it, but I wonder if our panelists might comment on the challenges or the successes you've had in reaching folks who could be helped by your organizations.
Well, I could start to say that, we have a robust program to get the word out, and I don't think it is sufficient because the word isn't out the way it ought to be. We've done numerous Know Your Rights panels like this around the state. We work very closely with HUD. We have a contract with HUD, a housing, a processing contract. So if your case is filed with, if you file a case with HUD, normally it will be investigated by the Division of Human Rights in New York, or more often than not. And you know, and part of our contract with HUD is outreach and education, which is how we enforce the law. You can only really enforce by cases in a small degree. We need education, mostly of providers and real estate professionals, in order to get there. But absent, you know, our entire budget being spent on outreach, and we do want to do the cases as well, it is somewhat limiting, and it is frustrating. And so I so appreciate this kind of a forum to get that issue out there, and thank you for that. But no easy answer there, I'm afraid.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I'll just add, we also do a lot of presentations and trainings to housing providers. We do a lot of work with service providers. So you know, we do, you know, people working with individuals who may be impacted or experience housing discrimination. And that's been, I think, a fairly effective way to kind of broaden our reach, and ends up being a source of a lot of referrals. It's tough, you know, people have a lot going on in their lives, and so it can be challenging to, you know, we try to meet people where they are, and connect to groups, existing groups, and do presentations with, you know, parent groups at Head Start, for example, or existing tenant organizations, things like that, to try to, you know, get to where there are already audiences, and instead of trying to get people out as well. So, but it is certainly challenging. There's estimates nationally that about 90% of housing discrimination cases go unreported. So there's always a lot more work to do. It's one of the reasons we do audit-based testing, so that we can find those unreported instances of discrimination that are happening.
Those folks who don't need to come to you because you found it on your own. Gotcha.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
And then we can change that behavior of those housing providers.
Got it.
We are also at Legal Services. We're available for presentations and do those fairly regularly. And one of the things that we do is, as much as possible, is we do partner with some of the tenants organizations that are out there. Syracuse has a tenants union now that has been a good source of referrals for us, as well as you know, a variety of other agencies. The Greater Syracuse Tenants Network, I get a lot of referrals from them. So we make sure that we try to make sure that we're out there. Now, one, I think it's a good and bad thing, is we do in Syracuse City Court, there are attorneys from our agency or from a couple of other agencies that do some evictions in this community. There's almost always somebody there that will be able to take a case for an unrepresented tenant, and that's terrific. It's for my comfort, it's a little too late, because again, they are pushed to try to settle a case, when I feel that every single case needs to be fully investigated and looked at. You are entitled to a 14-day adjournment at the first appearance in landlord-tenant cases now, a single 14-day adjournment. So we have also, in many of our outlying areas, we make ourselves available. We obviously can't be, we cover some 300 courts. We can't have an attorney at every single court date that handles evictions, but to make ourselves aware. And we find that over a period of time, many of the judges are willing to give them the adjournment for the 14 days and let them know that there are legal resources available to them.
Gotcha. In hindsight, my question looks like I'm fishing for a compliment for Focus for providing this forum. I assure you that was not the case, but thank you for your answers. We had a few questions submitted in advance from folks asking about zoning. And I know, Sally, you touched on it in your remarks. We've talked about this before with you, but I wonder if you might say a few things about how does one, exercise that lever to address some of the issues and Sally, you first, but certainly others as well.
Well, I think it's important to remember, when we're always operating in this housing crisis, right, where we're just working to keep people in their homes, to, keep them housed, because we don't have enough housing and enough quality, affordable housing, we're always going to be in this crisis where we're just trying to, desperately try to keep people's rights in place. What we really need to be doing is being more proactive about creating a housing market that allows people choice and opportunity and housing equity. And there has been a lot of discussion. I mean, we've completed this zoning report a few months ago, but there was a lot of discussion already about zoning going on, and the governor had some housing compact and zoning proposals that we hope moves forward in the legislative session now. But we do keep hearing local elected officials publicly acknowledging the need to change our zoning to allow for the construction of more affordable housing types. And it's, seems to be a new article every few days about different opportunities that we have to build more housing. And but I think there's so many things we can do. I don't unfortunately have a lot of confidence based on meetings I've had with local officials that they are going to make the difficult decisions that are necessary to actually make these things happen. We have opportunities to incorporate affordable housing in some of the existing housing development that's occurring, particularly in some of our suburban towns and villages. And but those require difficult decisions, and I just unfortunately don't know that the political will exists to do that. I do give the city of Syracuse credit for trying, and with rezone, there's a lot of great aspects of this to create more inclusionary housing policies through things like legalizing accessory dwelling units, row houses, other more affordable housing types. They have to get the details right, but they are moving in the right direction, and I hope we begin to see the rest of our municipalities in the county moving in the same direction as we continue to face the current housing crisis and the one that's to come as Micron causes a huge increase in demand for more housing in our community.
Gotcha. Caroline or Susan, would you like to come in on the zoning topic? Certainly don't have to, but anything you'd like to add?
That the statutory matters that are applied are, we apply statutes as they are in enforcing the human rights law. So that is not something we really weigh in on.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah, I think that Sally is by far the expert in this group about the problems with zoning that continue to be there.
Very good.
Just really quick to bring it back to fair housing, zoning as it relates to fair housing is a particular concern when we continue to allow comments in communities about the types of people who are welcome in a community. And we hear NIMBYism and resistance to people with disabilities, people who have lower incomes. And we're allowing those comments about who gets to live in our communities control our development processes. And that's where it's a fair housing issue, is that we're allowing that the fear of people to continue to dictate what types of housing we build in our community.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. We had a question come in via the chat or the Q&A about the pending, perhaps the announced migrant ban here in Onondaga County. Just came out. I have to confess, I'm not terribly conversant with it. But somebody asked the question, and what are the ramifications, right? How does that relate to the subject we're talking about here? And I wonder if somebody could explain it perhaps more adroitly than I, because I'm simply posing the question. But does anybody feel comfortable commenting on that and how it relates to fair housing? Sal?
I'm happy to comment because it is something I'm looking into and something we are discussing within our organization as well as with some of the fair housing groups across the state. So the county announced, Onondaga County announced, or the county executive announced an executive order yesterday to prohibit municipalities from contracting to provide housing to migrants seeking asylum. And similarly, Oswego County just announced this week also a prohibition against any hotels or multifamily housing providers, a ban that would not allow any of those housing providers from providing housing for migrants seeking asylum. I think those are the terms used in the executive orders. They might be a little bit different between the two. Similarly, there was a couple of counties downstate who've also passed similar executive orders, I believe last week. The New York Civil Liberties Union has already filed a case against Rockland County, and I believe another neighboring county downstate regarding those bans. We are looking at this as a fair housing violation. I mean, the New York State has protections based on citizenship and immigration status, not to mention, I think federal protections based on national origin and race could apply as well. It would likely apply, but certainly the state citizenship and immigration status protections, I think, would prohibit this. But, we are looking at the details, and we'll be reaching out to some of the other legal, civil rights partners across the state regarding these actions.
Got it. We have just a few minutes left, but I want to give Caroline and Susan a chance to weigh in if you would like to do so.
I think Sally, I think Sally stated it pretty well, and I'm not familiar with yesterday's executive order from Onondaga County or some of these others as well. But she's absolutely right. We cover specifically in housing now citizenship and immigration status, so that would have a broad reach as well as the national origin and race pieces.
Very good.
Yeah, I would just like to say that personally, it makes me very sad, honestly. It's just another way of trying to ban people who are in very difficult circumstances based on reasons that don't make sense to me. I think Syracuse has traditionally been very welcoming to the immigrant community, and I'm sorry to see at the highest levels of our government here we're deciding not to do that. So we'll deal with the issues as they come, but I think as a systemic issue, it's very sad.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thanks. Well, I'm sorry we don't have time for more of your questions, but thanks certainly from me to our panelists. And Rita, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, a big thank you to Caroline, and I'm just getting Bernard up here. A big thank you to Caroline and to Sally and to Susan and of course to Bernard for this presentation. It's a huge topic, and I know there's probably been frustration among the panelists as well as our attendees as to how much more they would like to hear about this and understand. But we're very appreciative of your time, and hope that others will reach out who need your services. So we have been recording this session, and we will be posting it on the Focus website shortly, focussyracuse.org. So it's certainly, if you want other people to, if you know of other people who would like to learn a little bit more about this, you'll be able to find it there in probably a couple of days, early next week. Focus is able to make these opportunities available with the financial support of the community. 2023 is actually, it marks Focus's 25th anniversary serving the Central New York community, and we'd appreciate any donations to support our efforts. And again, those donations can be made at our website, focussyracuse.org. Again, thank you so much, and everyone have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.